we've only got two more organelles, membrane-bound organelles, one being the mitochondria, or mitochondrion, as it is singular, and the nucleus. However, these two have the biggest discussion. So we're going to break it down into the mitochondria, what it does, and then we're going to talk about the nucleus and the components and what they do. So the mitochondrion. Mitochondrion. So if we look at it inside of a cell, we got our nucleus inside of the cell. And then we have all these other things. We got the Golgi, the endoplasmic reticulum sits here, and then we got a nice little pancakey guy that sits out here, the Golgi apparatus. And then underneath all of this, we have the cytoskeleton. Wraps around through everything, the cytoskeleton. Okay, every which way. And then we have these little oblong guys. They got this weird shape. Scattered throughout most of our cells. Well, red blood cells don't have them. And there could be like from 2 to like thousands of them. And they're called mitochondria. Mitochondria. So these green guys are the mitochondrion. Mitochondria is the plural form. Okay? All right, so what is it and what does it do? So I know this microbiologist and he hates this definition, but I think it's the definition that actually fits the best. It is the powerhouse of the cell. Right? So what does that actually mean? It makes the majority of your ATP. Okay. And remember, ATP is adenosine triphosphate, and that is the cellular storage. Sorry, not the cellular storage. That was stupid. It is the molecular storage of energy itself. So if we take a look at the mitochondria, so its structure. Okay. It is a double membrane. It is a double membrane. Now, in the long run, does that matter? Hell no. It does not matter that you know that it's a double membrane thing, but I'm just doing that for completeness. So it's got a smooth outer membrane. Okay, it has a smooth outer membrane. So if we draw it out, so we got this nice smooth. So it's got a smooth outer membrane. All right. And it's got an inner membrane with folds. Okay. So it's got this other membrane inside of it. And it's got these folds. Okay. So that's what I mean by double. So this would be the outer. And this in here would be the inner membrane. So, okay. And what these little projections are, they're called the cristae. Again, that's even double doesn't matter. Cristae. Okay. Now we have the matrix. The matrix. Okay, is the fluid around the cristae. The cristae itself. All right, and so we've already said what its job is. It is to take chemical energy from the food that you eat and produce ATP. That's what it is. That's its job. So now, how does it do this? Now, in order to describe how it does this, we actually have to talk about what's called cellular respiration. Cellular respiration. And what we're going to do is we're going to do a high-level overview of cellular respiration. High-level overview of cellular respiration. Okay. All right. Down and dirty. Basically, what cellular respiration does is it takes glucose, chops the hell out of it to make ATP plus carbon dioxide plus water, glucose and oxygen. Okay, that is the highest level that you're going to get. I mean, that is bam, cellular respiration at the highest level. So we got to dig a little bit into it. So let's take a big picture of our cell. We're just going to have a big old cell right here. Big old cell. And what we're going to do is we're going to make a weird cell here. So here's going to be our nucleus, just so we have perspective. Okay. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to make a very large mitochondria. This is going to be our mitochondria. Okay. So as we can see right here, basically we've got two compartments in the cell that we're looking at. We've got the extracellular fluid. So this is compartment 1. This is the extracellular fluid. And then we have compartment 2. This is the mitochondria. So you can, so if you're like on the edge of your edge of your seat, like in anticipation, you can be like, oh, there's 2 parts to this. 100% correct. Okay. So how we're going to start is glucose. And we all know that glucose is a 6-carbon sugar. Okay, it's going to get taken into the cell. Okay, you don't have to know the mechanics about how glucose is actually taken in the cell. We'll talk about that when we talk about insulin and the pancreas. So glucose gets taken into the cell. Glucose. Okay, and once it is in the cytosol, once it is in the cytoplasm, a process called anaerobic respiration occurs. Anaerobic respiration. Anaerobic means no oxygen needed. Okay? It doesn't mean that there's no oxygen present. No oxygen present, because if there was no oxygen present, that's called suffocation and you'll die. All right? But you don't need it. It's not needed in order to do this. Okay, so glucose goes into the cell and immediately it's going to undergo what's called anaerobic respiration, specifically glycolysis. Glycolysis. Okay, now glycolysis, if you look at this word, glyco, sugar, lysis means to split. So what the glucose is going to do, it's going to get cut into 2 molecules of spell that correctly, into 2 molecules called pyruvate. Okay. All right. So now you're like, cool, simple. Yeah, it really, well, it's really complex, but just for us, this is really simple. So how does this occur? So what happens is there's a bunch of cellular mechanisms that happen. And what we do is we take 2 ATP. Okay, so 2 ATP. We break them down to 2 ADP. ADP. Okay, to get glycolysis. And before we make the pyruvate itself, we're going to take 4 ADP. And we're going to generate 4 ATP. So in glycolysis, you get a net 2 ATP. Okay, so I want you to remember this. Okay, I want you to remember this. Actually, there are 3 things I want you to remember about Okay, remember these things when we talk about glycolysis. One, it's anaerobic. We do not need oxygen in order to happen. It happens in the cytoplasm. We get pyruvate. Okay, we take glucose and we cut it into pyruvate, and we get 2 of them. We get 2 pyruvates. And then finally, we net 2 ATP. We have to use 2 ATP to start the reaction to break it, but at the end, we're going to get 4 total ATP. Okay? Cool. That's it. That's anaerobic respiration. Now, that's not a lot of ATP. That's not a lot of ATP for this whatsoever. We've got to have a much more efficient way to generate ATP. And we do have it. And it is called 2 things: the citric acid cycle and the electron transport chain. Okay? These things occur in the mitochondria. So here we have this circular thing. It's called the TCA cycle. Okay? You've probably heard it called Krebs cycle or the citric acid cycle. And it is the bane of beginning biology students. It really is. And trust me, it's the bane of anybody who's taking biochemistry as well. Because when I had to do this, I had to memorize this stupid thing. And I was like, in medical school, and I was like, am I really going to have to know all of this shit as we're going through? And everybody's like, no. And I was like, good, I'm not going to. But you have to know the big things. Okay? So, the first big thing you have to know about this is you need oxygen. This is aerobic. So you have to have oxygen. So in the presence of oxygen, so if O2 is just floating around in this cell, that means we've got oxygen present. We have oxygen present inside of the cell. And remember, oxygen, if it's floating around outside of the cell, it can come in. Okay? So that's how we get our oxygen into the cell. So we have oxygen floating around inside of the cell. Cool beans. So in the presence of oxygen, so what's going to happen is this pyruvate, which is 3 carbons long. 3 carbons. There's 3 carbons. Each pyruvate. It's going to get attached to this thing called acetyl coenzyme. Sorry, it's going to get, not acetyl coenzyme. It's going to get attached to this thing called coenzyme A to make acetyl coenzyme A. I'm going to draw this in the different colors to know that we're actually aerobic. So our blue is going to be aerobic. Okay, it's going to get attached to that to make acetyl coenzyme A. And after that, I just need you to know general things. So a pyruvate is going to get attached to coenzyme A to make acetyl coenzyme A. And then what's going to happen? What is going to happen is we're going to start picking off carbons. We're going to start picking up the carbons. But we're not picking off the carbons just for the carbons. We're picking off carbons for the electrons. Okay, because we're going to be breaking these bonds, but we're going to be stealing the electrons from them. Okay? And so what we're going to do is we're going to take these electrons and we're going to put them into this thing called the electron transport chain. Electron transport chain. Okay? And so what we're going to do is we're going to take these high energy electrons and we're going to harness that energy in order to make ATP. So we're going to get these high, and I'm still in blue, high energy electrons. Okay. We're going to shunt them into this electron transport chain. And you don't have to know the exact mechanisms of what happens in the electron transport chain. That's not important. It's not important at all. Okay? But what you do need to know, is that we use that energy to take ADP and we're going to turn it into ATP. Okay, we have to put the energy back into the system, and that's what the electron transport is going to do. It's going to take ADP and it's going to turn it into ATP. You don't have to know about all of the transporters. It doesn't matter like that. Okay, so anaerobic respiration takes glucose through glycolysis and turns it into pyruvate. Anaerobic. Okay, if we have oxygen present inside of the cell, if oxygen is present inside the cell, and also if a mitochondria is present in the cell. If you don't have a mitochondria, this isn't going to happen. If oxygen is present, that pyruvate will be shunted off into the mitochondria. Okay, that pyruvate will combine with this thing called it will combine with coenzyme A to make acetyl coenzyme A. And what it's going to do is it's going to start breaking off carbons. It's going to start breaking up those carbons to steal high energy electrons. And those high energy electrons are going to be shunted to the electron transport chain. Some people call it the electron transport system. It doesn't matter. Okay. And what the electron transport chain is going to do is it's going to use the energy from those high energy electrons to take the ADP and turn it back into ATP. Because if you remember the equation, remember this equation, ATP, if you cleave it, it's going to make ADP plus inorganic phosphate plus energy. Okay. This can go backwards. You can take this and go backwards. If I have energy, if I have ADP and inorganic phosphate, I can move it the other way. And that's what the electron transport chain does. It puts the energy back into it, reforms that bond to make ATP. Okay. So now the last big thing that you have to know about this is basically the numbers. Okay. So if we look at the citric acid cycle, so if we look at Krebs plus electron transport, wow, that's a compound word if I ever saw one. Electron transport chain. Okay. What you're going to do is you're going to get a couple things. Okay. You're going to get about 34 to 36 ATP per glucose. You're going to get 34 to 36 ATP per glucose. Okay, and this is called catabolism. You're catabolizing the glucose itself. Okay, right. You're also going to get CO2. Okay, because remember you're pulling off the carbons, and they have to go somewhere. And also remember that we need oxygen, and so that oxygen has to go somewhere. And then finally, you're going to get H2O. You're going to get H2O. Okay, so that's what you're going to get. So water, and you're going to get carbon dioxide. You ever wonder why you exhale carbon dioxide? Carbon dioxide comes out. This is the byproduct of cellular respiration, is the carbon dioxide. If you've ever wondered why you breathe, why do you breathe? And the answer I get is because if you don't, you'll die. And I'm like, duh, of course. But for what reason do you breathe? You just don't breathe because, it's nice, it's fun. You do it to put oxygen into the system so that your cells can carry out this process. Okay. So total ATP production from both glycolysis and what's called oxidative phosphorylation. It's the combination of Krebs and electron transport, is about 36 to 38 ATP. 36 to 38 ATP is the grand total. Okay, that's the grand total of ATP. Okay. Now, the last question we have to ask about this is, what happens if we don't have oxygen or not enough oxygen to carry this out? Okay, and it's called lactic acid fermentation. Okay, so let's just say, for instance, so we've got our cell right here. You remember we got glucose, it's going to be split into pyruvate. And it's going to be split into pyruvate. Okay. Now, if we don't have enough oxygen in order to, or we're just burning too much sugar for the mitochondria to keep up, what's going to happen is this is going to go through some further anaerobic how do I say reactions. Okay, and what it's going to do is it's going to make lactic acid. Okay, eventually it will be turned into lactic acid. Now the nice thing is lactic acid can be turned back into pyruvate itself. Okay, but that's what happens if you do not have enough oxygen in order to shunt the pyruvate to the mitochondria. Okay, you're going to get lactic acid. Okay, now I also want you to think about it like this as well. Okay, if you're a couch potato, and you decide, oh, I don't want to work out, but then you're like, and then you suffer your first heart attack, and then you're like, I need to start working out, and then you decide to work out, or you decide I'm going to be a weekend warrior, and I'm going to work out, I'm going to work my butt off, Saturday I'm going to work out, I'm going to start my thing, and then you quit on Sunday because you're sore as hell. Okay, the reason is you got lactic acid built up. Okay, now mitochondria can replicate themselves. Okay, and if you don't need them, they won't, and you'll actually have a fewer number of mitochondria. So if you tell your muscles to increase their workload, they're not going to have enough mitochondria to meet that demand. So you can saturate a mitochondria. You can fill up a mitochondria with sugar to the point where it can't work enough. And so what the cell will do, and the muscle cell doesn't give a damn about this. It's going to be like, I've got to work, I'm going to get the energy. So instead of using the mitochondria to do it, what it'll do is it'll use glycolysis to get as much energy as possible. And you've seen just by pure numbers that glycolysis sucks. It's terrible. It is a terrible way to get energy for us. Okay, because it's not enough. It just does not generate enough ATP. So then what happens is you've got all this excess pyruvate just sitting around in the cell, in the cytosol, and not enough mitochondria to handle the demand. So what's going to happen is that's just going to get converted into lactic acid. Okay, so it's not because there's no oxygen. There's plenty of oxygen. I've seen people gasping and dying when they're exercising. Everybody's seen it, and we've all probably been there at one time where we have this. It's just that you cannot process it. You're asking too much of the cell, and then eventually what's going to happen is the cell will increase its mitochondrial supply. The cells will get stronger, and they're able to undergo that much better. But that's just one of the fates. Okay, so if you don't have and the general lack of oxygen will cause that as well. If you do not have enough oxygen, you're going to make lactic acid. Okay, but on the converse thing, I don't want you to only think that just having too little oxygen will do it. If you don't have the mitochondria to meet the demand, you're also going to make lactic acid. Okay, and so that's it in an overview. I don't want to beat this up forever, but I think if you understand that and you look at that, and in your textbook, it's got some pretty decent pictures about this. You'll be fine. And that's cellular respiration, very high overview. And you're going to be getting that. You're going to be getting more of this next semester. You'll be looking at that more in depth. Well, no, not next semester. I was thinking wrong class. You won't need to go into this any more than what I've given you. So that's cellular respiration. So the next we're going to talk about the nucleus, and we're going to talk about DNA synthesis and protein synthesis.